I'm not prescribing anything. Everything that we've read says that it's beneficial for women and for men, especially in a reproductive health kind of way.
Let's ditch the quick fix and dive into today's conversation. Welcome, everybody. My guest today is Dr. Thomas Seager. Dr. Seager teaches engineering business practices at Arizona State University. He is a co-founder of the Morozko Forge LLC and co-inventor of the world's first ice bath that makes its own ice. Dr. Seager combines his experience transforming his health and quality of life with the science of deliberate cold exposure to reveal the extraordinary benefits of restoring ancestral conditions of cold exposure to our modern lives. Welcome, Dr. Seager. Very excited to have you here today.
Thank you.
Yes. So I thought it'd be good to just kind of start off with you giving us a little bit more of the history I just kind of touched on with yourself and with cold therapy, and then specifically, your new product, the first ice bath that makes its own ice. That's pretty cool.
Thanks. I should make a distinction. I'm a doctor of philosophy in engineering. The only reason you call me Dr. Seager is because I teach at a major university, and you're a medical doctor. So the Ph.D. and the M.D., two different kinds of advice. I know how to read literature and organize knowledge and do research, and I don't know how to give medical advice. That's your department. Instead, I talk about my experiences and what's happened to me, what's worked for me, and then I encourage people to experiment for themselves. And often, you probably read some of the articles, I talk about my experiences, and then I'll go to the library and I'll look for the scientific evidence that explains what's happening to me. And that might encourage other people to think about what experiments they want to run and what they would expect. So one of those has been ice baths, and it's been the biggest and most transformative of all the different things, whether it's ketosis or intermittent fasting or some other alternative technologies for health. The ice baths are the one that I've committed to hard. And it might be because I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and cold showers aren't available. Maybe 3 months out of the year, we can do cold showers. I started that way. It was winter. And here the tap water gets down to the low 60s in the winter, which isn't very cold at all. But I hated them. There's something about, your shoulder is wet and cold and the rest of you is warm. And the cold showers made me angry. But I did them. And I did them because not so much, I wasn't looking for the metabolic benefits. I was looking for the psychological benefits. In my university life, I study resilience. And so this would be, how does our infrastructure, I'm a civil engineer, how does it respond to catastrophe? That could be a power outage, or it could be a hurricane, or it could be a deliberate attack. And one of the things that I figured out is that it is the human response. It is the creativity of the human beings that will make or break our response to any catastrophe. We want our infrastructure to be strong. But in the throes of a catastrophe, it's not about the steel or the concrete or the electric power lines. It's about how people respond to those threats. There's a psychological component. And partly because I was going through my own life changes and I had my own stressors, and I wanted to understand this human resilience component better, I started the cold showers. Then in the summertime, cold showers aren't feasible. So my partner, Jason, and I, we bought a horse trough and we bought a bunch of ice, and we started on the weekend. 200 pounds of ice. It doesn't last very long when it's 110 degrees in Jason's backyard in Phoenix. And we're both engineers, and we thought, well, we ought to be able to do this. We started taking apart freezers. We started to learn how the technology of refrigeration works. Now, I got a Ph.D. and I've done my research in environmental thermodynamics. I understand entropy, I understand enthalpy and heat transfer, but it's a totally different thing when you're trying to get a compressor and a bunch of coils to do it in practice. All the equations that I learned weren't helping us out at all.
Gotcha.
It took us months, and we figured out how to make ice. We had a party. We invited a bunch of friends over, and one of them said he loved it and wanted to buy it. That's when we thought, gosh, we should we should have a business. And we thought we might make one or two forge a month and sell them to our friends and that kind of thing. And we've gone nuts. I went up to my eyeballs in credit card debt. Jason went months behind on his mortgage because we got so into this mission and this startup life that we reached a point of no turning back. It's been funny because Morozko Forge is both the cause of stress and the answer to it in our lives.
Very nice.
Now, we're doing these kinds of podcasts and we're proselytizing about cold exposure, and we're trying to share what we've learned so that other people can benefit. And that's how I met you.
That's awesome. And so how long has it been since the company started? How many years are you in now?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
That's pretty exciting.
When we started, there wasn't really anything like what we were trying to do on the market. There was one competitor, they got down to 42 degrees, and I think they do a pretty good job. They were mostly selling to teams for exercise recovery, and we wanted to do something different. We wanted to make ice. We wanted floating chunks of ice in the water, partly because of the aesthetic of it. It sounds good, it feels good, and partly because when I look down in my forge and I see ice there, I don't need a thermometer. I know it's cold.
Right.
It creates that anticipatory anxiety. And I've got a good article on our website. It says, set your forge to a temperature that frightens you. Because part of the psychological benefits is putting yourself into that sympathetic fight or flight state where every cell in your body is screaming at your brain, saying, we're going to die. You've got to get us out of here. And then the brain, the challenge is to talk back to your body and say, this is what cold feels like. This is not death. This is not some existential panic crisis. We're going to feel cold now because I said so.
So before we get into some of those benefits, and I'm excited to get there, what about some of the history of cultures that have used ice therapy, whether it's been cold water exposure, maybe it's snow exposure to the skin, maybe it's air exposure. Have you studied some of that, and what's some of the history there?
Well, it's funny you should mention it because before it seemed like the whole world lost their minds and we went on travel lockdown, I used to do a lot of travel for my job, a lot of lecturing. The Army Corps invited me to a seminar on Arctic security. And this is in the dead of winter, January. It's in Rovaniemi, Finland. It's great. I go up there with a bunch of other NATO nations and scientists, and we're going to talk about cyber attacks and infrastructure. But it's Rovaniemi in January, so I have to get ready for the cold. And I live in Phoenix. I had to buy a bunch of stuff that I haven't had in my wardrobe since I went to grad school in northern New York. So I'm getting the long johns. I'm getting the socks, and I got my raincoat. And when I checked in the hotel, they laughed at me and said, "Is that all you brought?" They said, "You're up in Santa Claus country now."
Interesting.
So I went out skiing. They have a little bunny slope, nothing too extraordinary. And it was great. It was great because I'd already acclimated myself to the cold. I've built up the brown fat that burns fat and clears glucose from my bloodstream, keeps myself warm. It's called non-shivering thermogenesis.
Okay.
And so here I am in my silkies and a sweater and a raincoat, and I'm doing great. In every hotel room where we stayed during this NATO workshop, there's a sauna because the Finns are into this long history. Of sauna. And evidently they take the cold for granted. Because if you want to you go outside during the wintertime and it's plenty cold and they jump back and forth. Now, it turns out there's some good science on sauna for longevity, on contrast therapy, and how it helps you live a longer quality of life and longer duration of life too. And most of it is coming from the Scandinavian countries, from Finland and from Russia, where they get seasonal access to cold. In Phoenix, I don't have that.
Correct.
Something happens to the people who move here. It takes a couple or 3 years, and we have a term called the Phoenix wimp, where I went to grad school, Potsdam, New York. It's north of Lake Placid. And you can imagine in March, the snow would start to melt, it'd get up to be 40 degrees. And we go outside in our shorts, we play Frisbee. And we're like, oh, this is fantastic. But after a few years of living in Phoenix, people lose their brown fat and it'll get down to 65 and they'll put on their caps and that scarf and their winter coats. And I'm going, that's not cold. This is the Phoenix wind because they lose their acclimation to cold. My ancestors, going way back, whether it's the Pilgrims or before the Pilgrims, they hated to be uncomfortable. Because they're on the edge of starvation all winter long in Northern Europe or in New England. And of course, the fire is comfortable and they get plenty of cold exposure. But my body is not adapted to our technological, industrialized, climate-controlled, comfortable life.
Right.
And so I have to seek that discomfort to stay healthy in ways that my ancestors took for granted.
And that it's a good way to transition into the benefits, because when it comes to health, the idea that a lot of people really kind of gravitate to sometimes, and unfortunately too many times, is the very simple approach, rather than doing what it really takes to stress the body in so many different ways to get the body to respond to be stronger. That's what we're talking about, right? We're asking the body to respond to be stronger. So you do exercise, you can do some exercises that may get you going a little bit, but if you really want to stress the body to rebuild and repair itself stronger, you really have to kind of stress it. And that's unique to each individual. Nobody, is going to be on the same page. Everybody's got their own individuality, and that's why the one size fits all doesn't apply. But using lots of different methods in different ways can really make a big benefit. And so, if you're in Phoenix, you're not getting enough cold exposure. I'm up in Washington. We get a little bit of both. I'm on the Hood Canal, and I was going to ask you this question. I was thinking maybe I should start trying to do a little bit of that before I graduate to a forge, for the summertime. So the benefits that we're talking about here is how the body rebuilds and repairs itself when it's exposed to these things. So what are some of the physical benefits that you're already kind of touching on? And then I think really importantly, the psychological benefits as well.
Well, Benjamin Bickman, he's a Ph.D. I'm forgetting the university, but he wrote a great book called Why We Get Sick. And it's principally about insulin resistance. There's something like $500 million a year we spend on treating diabetes. My son is type 1 diabetic, and it's a little bit different. It's not reversible because his body no longer makes insulin. But type 2 diabetes is this extension of insulin resistance. Most of us, most adults, have some, because of our Western diet and our comfortable lives, have some insulin resistance. And when that insulin resistance gets extreme, then glucose stays in the bloodstream instead of entering the cell. The job of insulin is to transport glucose across that barrier into the cell where it can reach the mitochondria and be metabolized. Well, Bickman's thesis is that insulin resistance is pervasive and that it is the determining factor in 8 out of the 10 leading causes of disease that all correlate with age. Because if you don't do something about it, it progresses with age. This is a disorder of metabolism. And there's some good reasons for it. The mitochondria are responsible for processing, we all run on electricity, for processing the chemical energy in glucose or in fat into the electrical energy that we require to move our muscles or to keep ourselves warm. And the mitochondria are very sensitive to glucose overload. That is too much energy, too much to process. They will generate free radicals that damage the mitochondrial DNA. This is speculative, but evidently our body protects our mitochondria from that premature aging by preventing the entry of glucose into the cell. That is, insulin resistance is the body's adaptive response to the constant stress of too many carbohydrates, overload. No place to go.
Yep.
You can fix it with low carb, with intermittent fasting. And it turns out for most of us, we're not habituated to it. And we're inundated with advertising messages and cultural cues to eat more carbohydrates. Think about, the office hero who brings in the donuts. Well, or Christmas time is coming up, and
oh my goodness,
it's rude to not eat the Christmas sweets and cookies. This is what I mean about the cultural cues.
Sure.
Now, We can habituate ourselves. Because my son was diagnosed type 1 at the age of 6, we learned how to eschew, in a polite way, the muffins and the cookies and things like that. Well, it's not good for me. Oh, it requires too much insulin. And I learned a lot about insulin even before I read Bickman's book. What cold exposure does is clear glucose from the bloodstream and increase insulin sensitivity. So exercise will do it too. Exercise has many of the metabolic benefits that cold exposure does. It gives the energy a place to go. It activates brown fat for non-shivering thermogenesis. It recruits new brown fat to your body, and brown fat is packed with mitochondria. It helps restore the mitochondria because your body has selection mechanisms for reproducing the healthiest mitochondria as it replaces old mitochondria and as it produces new mitochondria for brown fat. So one of the best and the fastest ways to restore yourself to metabolic health is to add a little deliberate cold exposure. And it doesn't have to even be that cold. 50 degrees is fine. One way to get started is what I call underdressing. So you're going to go for a walk, or you're going to go, I don't know, play some winter golf, or whatever you're going to do outside. Stay outside for an hour or two. Go in shorts, go in a t-shirt. Your neighbors are going to think you're nuts. And they might ask you what's going on. But as soon as you begin to feel that shiver response, you've activated thermogenesis, you're getting the metabolic benefits. The shiver is the muscles. They also use glucose and some fat to twitch so that they will generate heat. Brown fat is the key to fixing your metabolism. It signals the thyroid, the two regulate one another. And when you don't have enough of it, your thyroid can become dysregulated, whether it's hypo or hyper.
Gotcha. Yep.
And the best way to recruit new brown fat is cold exposure. Exercise won't do it. There's some foods and supplements that will help activate it, but cold exposure is more effective than anything else for restoring your body to that brown fat balance that you were born with.
So, not to get into this rabbit hole too far, but and correct me if I'm off the rails here a little bit, but most people are trying to get into a low fat kind of diet so that they can, be healthier. And in reality, most people don't realize that sugar is actually what processes into fat. And what we're talking about here is, getting the right sugar is one part of the puzzle, but also understanding that we want the brown fat, not necessarily the negative fat. And so can you kind of touch on that? Am I in the right ballpark there?
Yeah, there are two types of fat, and this is very difficult because when I say cold exposure will recruit brown fat, people say, "Well, I don't want fat. I'm trying to change my body composition," and I'm no Instagram model of leanness or something. So they immediately get a reaction. But there are two types. There's more than two. There's an in between called beige. But for the sake of our discussion, there's white fat, and white fat is where energy is stored. Brown fat is where the energy is burnt up into heat. So you need brown fat to burn the white fat. And there have been a number of epidemiological studies and assays that show people with more brown fat are in fact leaner. So one way to promote weight loss is to recruit, and this is ironic, is to recruit more brown fat. Now it accumulates on the top of your back and sort of at the top of your chest, sometimes around your heart. And it sounds kind of icky, but the point is it doesn't go where the white, I hesitate to do this, Damon, but it doesn't go to the places that we all want to slim down. It's stored in places in the core of your body where it helps keep your internal organs warm when you're cold.
That's pretty exciting. And it's really, one of those things that it's something you kind of have to train, right? So what has been your experience? For me, I'm familiar with Arizona, been down there a few times. We have a home in Arizona that we use as a rental investment. So it's funny because I'll be down there and people are in that mode, of coats and hats. And, my wife and I are t-shirts and shorts. And I wear t-shirts and shorts around here when I'm not in my office and people think I'm a little bit weird. But I'm just more comfortable that way. I wasn't necessarily trying to get the cold exposure benefit. What are some of the specific, I know I've seen a couple things that you've shared about men, for example, prostate benefit. I think testosterone, there was some Japanese study I think I got that you had referred to. What about those benefits?
Yeah, this was a happy accident that was precipitated by a crisis in my blood work. I started to concern myself with health and wellness. And I went to the lab and I checked all the boxes. Give me the cholesterol and give me everything. Because in Arizona, you can order your own blood test. And I'm getting into biohacking and I'm a curious kind of guy. And one of the things that came back was PSA. And I was early 50s. It's at an age when people can get concerned about their prostate. And 7.0, what the heck was that? I got a little frightened. I had to do some self-education, go online, and I learned that the PSA results are not definitive, that they vary quite a bit, that they correlate with an increased risk of cancer, but they don't say that you have cancer. And I thought I really need to know more. One of the things that we do at Morozko Forge is it's no longer about the academic mode of learning exclusively. I'm a scientist, but it turns out that we do a lot of learning in storytelling, just by talking and sharing about our experiences, and that human beings are hardwired to learn to make sense of things through stories. So I started talking to other men older than me, younger than me, my age, about whether they'd had any similar sort of prostate scares. And my God, Damon, the stories started coming out. People that I was very close to were saying, well, yeah, I had my prostate removed. When did you do that? They're like, last year. But you knew me last year. Why didn't you let me know that you were going under the knife? Well, Tom, it's not really the kind of thing that you talk about.
Right.
Men don't share anywhere near enough information with one another. And as I talked to men who'd had biopsies and elevated PSAs and prostate removal surgery, I decided that was not for me. And this is a very personal decision, but my kids were grown and I sort of looked into my conscience. I didn't want a biopsy. I didn't want surgery. I didn't want to go through that, and I didn't want to live that way. I'm not judging other people who do. I decided that I needed to try other modalities. And for me, that was going to be ketogenic diet, intermittent fasting, and see if the ketones and starving my body of carbohydrates could result in an improvement of my PSA. So over the next 6 months, I got down to 1.5, I got down to 0.8, and I was reassured by these numbers. It's not a medical miracle, but it sort of validated my approach that I didn't want to enter the traditional medical establishment and cut myself open. And a funny thing happened. Because I was checking all those blood boxes, I was also getting testosterone readings. And I started out in really good shape. I forget exactly where I was, like 700 or something. And as I was tracking my PSA, my testosterone kept climbing until eventually I got to 1180. And you got to imagine a guy who's in his early 50s at 1180. That report came back from the lab with, big red exclamation mark on it. And it said, abnormally high. It's out of range. So I had to learn some things about testosterone.
Testosterone, right?
Does that sound right to you?
Right. So where'd you go for some of that information to see if that was out of line?
I go to scholar.google.com. I mean, it used to be that, like, when I started my career, I had to get up out of my desk and walk to the library and peruse the journals.
That was my journey.
Universities, I started at Purdue, and they had an engineering library. And the odds that I would stumble across something in health or wellness or psychology, zero, because everything is so compartmentalized.
Yes.
The internet has changed all of that. Now, the electronic databases allow me to access literature, journal articles from anywhere.
Right.
And although I'm not as deep into medicine as you are, and I don't understand all the microbiology, I can read the epidemiological studies. I can read the experimental methods, and I can teach myself a lot. Turns out I had the testosterone of an oversexed 19-year-old. So I went to my urologist, and he said, I mean, he didn't really let on. He didn't believe me. He said, well, I'm going to send you back to the lab. Let's do one more test. And it was for luteinizing hormone. And it's not one of those that you can order yourself. So I had to learn about that. And it's a metabolic precursor to testosterone. What he really wanted to know was was I juicing, or was this an endogenous production? And sure enough, luteinizing hormone came up through the roof, off the charts as well. And that's when I knew something else was going on inside my body besides my PSA. And so I go to scholar.google.com. I do a lot of searching. And that was that early 90s study that you were talking about. I cited it in the article on our website, morozkoforge.com. And they took a bunch of young men, college-age men, and they tried two things. The classic is exercise with ice bath for recovery from exercise. And a lot of people do this. They'll do their weight training, or they'll do a run and they'll soak their knees or something. It's typical. And then they reversed it. They said, what if we did the ice bath and then we used the exercise to recover from the ice bath? And they didn't even really do a lot of exercise. They got on a bike, and I forget exactly, but maybe it was 20 minutes, strenuous activity on the exercise bike. When they did exercise, then ice bath, testosterone went way down. Luteinizing hormone went way down. The cold suppressed the metabolic production of testosterone and luteinizing hormone. Okay. But when they did it the other way, they started with the cold and then did the exercise. They finished with elevated testosterone, elevated luteinizing hormone, and it persisted for hours. And I thought, this is exactly what I've been doing, because I haven't been working out. I've been doing my forage every morning, and I get out and I have, all this energy. I'll get my steel mace and I'll do some 360s, or I'll get my barbell and I'll do some lunges or some squats. And I thought it was just to help the blood restore, come back to my extremities and burn off some of that extra energy. Turns out I was doing exactly what these Japanese scientists discovered was effective for boosting my testosterone. So I called Jason up and I said, I think I'm really onto something here. Will you get your testosterone checked? And he's younger than me. So he said, sure. His birthday's in October, and he gets his testosterone checked every year. So when he was 40, it wasn't awful, but his testosterone was 550. And most doctors would say, you're doing great at 550. 40-year-old man, healthy. Year later, 715. And most doctors would say, wow, you must be really taking care of yourself. He's 42 last October. And he came back 913.
Yeah.
What that means
Pretty cool.
Right, we have my story. We have the science that explains what's going on with me. And now we've reproduced it over time, but in another individual who has seen similar results. This suggests that more men should be experimenting with cold exposure and then exercise. And we have a number of customers who are doing exactly that. I've asked them, hey, will you get a before reading? And then we'll check back in 6 months. Then we'll check back in a year. Let's see what's going on with you.
Yeah, build out some of that anecdotal evidence, and then hopefully the studies will continue to confirm it. For me, it was counterintuitive as I was preparing for this interview. I go, typically what I'm telling my patients, hey, warm your body up a little bit before you even stretch. Warm your body up before you do a little bit of, and the idea there is to get your vascular system kind of moving a little bit. So to get, that cold experience, especially at that temp, 35 degrees, that was just kind of counterintuitive, but I'm excited about what you're finding. And again, it goes back to the body's just designed to react to what we do to it, good or bad. And sometimes we think something's bad, it can be good. And you can always overdo it. Before I jump into, some of the safety concerns people would have, I'm curious, have you found any particular benefits when it comes to females? We're talking a little about the male benefit right now. And have you had any unique benefits for women?
Well, this is pretty controversial, Damon. You know that in every medical field, we always make caveats about pregnant women, but not for pregnant women, because there's such a vulnerable population that most medical professionals and the guys who sell supplements and the trainers, they don't want to even talk about pregnant women because of the liabilities that might show up there. But there's a woman in Germany who is Wim Hof certified. She's a medical doctor, and she did an Instagram post about her sister who is practicing cold exposure in a pool during her pregnancy. And because she's a medical doctor, and she said, I think this is a good thing for my sister, I reached out to her and said, what if we did an article? Could I cite your post? And could I quote you in this way? And she said, absolutely. Turns out there's a lot of good science about cold exposure and female fertility, both when you're seeking to conceive and especially in the first trimester. And it makes sense because gestational diabetes is a real and serious phenomenon. It's an insulin-resistant woman who manifests as diabetic during pregnancy because of the additional metabolic stress of pregnancy. And there are risks both to the child and to the mom of gestational diabetes. And so this is all kicking around in my mind. And sure enough, we discovered the studies that women who are inadvertently, because of seasonality or because of their geography, exposed to cold have better birth outcomes and conceive more readily. Women who, at the wrong time during their pregnancy, are exposed to heat, stress their bodies and stress the fetus in ways that can be detrimental. So now we have some of this epidemiological evidence that suggests cold exposure is not just healthy or not just safe, but healthy, beneficial for women seeking to conceive and gestating. And we have some of the mechanistic evidence that says these are exactly the people that should be most concerned about their metabolic health. So I went back to this medical doctor in Germany and I said, this is what we've written up. She said, oh, it looks great. And that I felt reassured. And she said, by the way, I'm pregnant. Congratulations.
Nice. Nice. And she had been using the cold exposure.
Exactly.
That's so cool. That's very cool.
It's not in isolation. We have another customer who they were trying to conceive and they thought, well, the cold exposure would help. And so sure enough, we shipped them a Ford. This was very early going. They were early adopters. And I visited them this summer and they have a beautiful little baby. They're the cutest couple. And I'm not saying these are just anecdotes now, and they're supported by some of the epidemiological studies. I'm not prescribing anything. What I'm saying is everything that we've read says that it's beneficial for women and for men, especially in a reproductive health kind of way.
Have you experienced any, demographic, as far as age specific? So kind of getting into some of these possible safety concerns that people would rightly want to know, like, is there an age? Is there a risk for people that have cardiovascular issues? Is there a certain time? How much time can you spend before you really do get into hypothermia and you've gone overboard, those kinds of things?
For me, I'm pretty sure hypothermia was 14 minutes at 34 degrees. I was in there too long and I had a plan. I was going to do cold exposure and then I was going to go to hot yoga. And so I was going to get this contrast therapy. But I got to talking and 14 minutes later, when I came out of the forge, I had no motor control and I drive a stick. I wasn't ready to drive. So I had to do some
yoga right away.
Right. And yoga was like 15-minute drive away. So I had to rewarm. I got to the hot yoga and I was a little late going into the class, but the instructor was very gracious. No, come in, and I was all discombobulated and I couldn't get my half monkey twist moon, whatever the hell we're doing in yoga. I was doing it wrong. And her corrections, she was trying to explain it a little better because she'd see I was struggling. Finally, she just came over. She put her hand on my back and she said, no, move this way. And you should feel it in here. And it was wonderful. And I had a great session. And afterwards I went up and I said, thanks for that correction. It made a big difference. She said, no problem. That's what we do. But let me ask you a question. Was it hot enough for you in there? And I said, well, yeah, I think you had 120 something degrees. And sure, that seemed plenty hot. She goes, no, when I put my hand on your back, you felt cold.
Oh, yeah.
So
that's interesting.
I had to explain. It's almost certain, I don't have a rectal thermometer, but it's almost certain that my core temperature dropped. And that's not fatal. One of our rules is there's no coercion. You get in when you want, you come out when you want. And a 9-second ice bath is better than no ice bath. And that voluntary aspect, I think, is essential for building the psychological resilience. People can experience hypothermia and recover. The rule that an emergency room physician taught me is for cold water drowning, you do not pronounce them. They might show up and they look dead and they've got no pulse and your brain waves are missing. but you do not pronounce death for 24 hours because in a cold water situation, the body can go into, I'm not using a medical term, but essentially a hibernation, and
Some
people
type of
have recovered. I don't mean to exaggerate. I mean, there are dangers of hypothermia, but we use the term deliberate cold exposure, not accidental cold exposure,
right.
because accidental can be dangerous and deliberate is what we're going for. So you go to a Wikipedia page on ice baths, and I've tried to edit it like 6 times and they won't let me do it. It describes how dangerous ice baths are. And so it sent me to the library. There are no cases of death. There are no cases of heart attack. I'm not saying they don't exist, but the dangers of ice baths, voluntary, deliberate ice baths, seem to me to be way exaggerated relative to the case studies and the data that are available in the library. So it gives me confidence that I'm in the hormetic stress zone, the stress that is good for your body, where you come back stronger. So the Greeks called it eustress rather than distress.
Well, I appreciate that. And as anything, people have to, take ownership of their own health and work with some type of a professional if they're, have those kinds of concerns. But using it in a time, and I appreciate what you're saying. You get in when you want to get in, you get out when you want to get out. It's kind of listening to your body, listening to your mind. And it sounds like, that is the way that anybody should do anything. But it's hard to teach that because we all get a little bit nervous when we take responsibility for our own health, like I'm going to mess it up,
Yep.
kind of thing. And so I appreciate that. And I'm sensitive to that. So,
there's a tremendous fear of criticism. What I did with my prostate, my kids are all grown and I was separated from my wife. We're since divorced. And I thought, to whom am I responsible? And I decided that I was going to go on this biohacking journey for me. But I've talked to a lot of other men that said, I didn't know how to explain it to my wife, or I didn't know how to explain it to my kids, or I didn't know how to explain it to my family who loves me, that I decided that I was going to spend 6 months or a year delaying conventional treatment to try this crazy experimental idea because I saw Dr. Seager walking around barefoot and shirtless at some conference who said it worked for him. It's not just fear of criticism, but there's a sense of obligation that we feel to the people who love us that sometimes prevents us from following our own curiosity or our own intuition about our bodies. We don't want to have to explain ourselves, and we especially don't want to feel guilty about letting down the people who are counting on us. So I get it.
Yeah, I do too. And boy, we're kind of running up against a time here, but I wanted to touch on a couple of things. There's several things, like I said before we started recording, that I'd love to go to, but just the functionality of a forge. Essentially, it's unique. It's the only one like it. So how do you, like in a sauna or a hot tub, for example, you're going to need to manage the water quality. I think you use ozone to manage the water quality. What's the functionality of a forge?
It's had its own built-in refrigeration. We make it all from scratch. We twist the copper, we add a compressor. The coils go underneath the forge. The coils get cold. They chill down to about -10. That's sometimes warmer, but that's not the point. Below freezing, so that you build up several inches of ice on the bottom. Then the compressor shuts off, and the ice releases up to the top. And that's the effect that I really like. Then as far as the filtration, we have both a pool filter, this is the microfiltration, and we add ozone. The ozone is what deactivates bacteria and viruses. The pool filter can remove dirt and some of the bacteria, but the ozone is essential for keeping the forge disinfected. And it creates beautiful, crystal clear water. You don't need a lot of ozonation. I run mine about a half an hour a day because it's just me. But in the commercial facilities, customers want confidence that the water is disinfected and that it's clean. And ozone is ideal. The pools, the water distribution system in your city, we use chlorine. Some pools use bromine. And the problem is that when it comes in contact with organic carbon, it produces something called trihalomethanes. Those are carcinogenic. And the last thing I'm going to do is expose my customers to carcinogenic chemicals just to cover my butt on disinfection.
Right.
Ozone is ideal at cold temperatures. It's not used in the water treatment distribution systems by environmental engineers like me because it decays so quickly. You don't get a long-lasting protection. But we're making it continuously, and the decay curve is sensitive to temperature. The colder the water, the longer lasting the ozone. So for us, the ozone is ideal.
Yeah, it really doesn't allow the microbes to be as aggressive in their growth, the temperature, and then you add the ozone if I'm on the right track there. So how often do you use the Forge? Is it
Every day.
Daily? Okay.
Yep, I got it right here at my apartment. I keep it out on the patio, and today was tough. I was up early and it was dark, and it's a little chilly. And I was looking at the Forge and I was thinking, I could skip a day. There's no harm, right?
Right.
First 30 seconds before I get in are the worst. And then I get in and it's never as bad as, it is in my imagination. But I want to set my Forge to a temperature that frightens me. It's not for the metabolic benefits. It's for the psychological benefits. Because when I do something on purpose that is uncomfortable and frightening, and I take control of my breathing and I relax my whole body, I strengthen my parasympathetic nervous system, my vagus nerves, now I can confront the stress of my day as if it's all no big deal.
Very good. Very good. So daily is definitely okay. And people that are using it are trying to do the daily routine as well.
That's what a Forge is really for. If you're doing it maybe on the weekends or, to prepare yourself from a big event, you can buy the ice baths or buy the bags of ice. But to do it daily, it's not feasible to have ice or to go to the lake during the winter or something like that. I do 2 to 4 minutes. So it's not this extended Joe Rogan 20-minute marathon session. And when I'm by myself, I'm not really trying to show off. What Scott Carney called it was microdosing the cold. And I think it's a wonderful sort of turn of phrase because it's right there anytime you need it. Anytime you're beginning to stress out or you want to change your mood. I've never come out of the Forge in a bad mood or having regrets about the ice bath that I just took.
And one more question on that. I know Joe Mercola has indicated that it's good to do a cold shower before bedtime to get better sleep. Have you had any experimentation with that where it sounds like you're doing it first of the morning kind of thing? What about in the evening before bed?
We have an article on the experiences that Dr. Brian Call, he's the chair of our medical advisory board, and he was fooling around with his Aura ring and cold exposure at nighttime. And he found that his sleep quality in some respects was much better when you did an ice bath around 9 o'clock. His sleep duration was not as long. And I think that's interesting. I've also had some good conversations with Dr. Kirk Parsley. He's the sleep doctor on Instagram or social media. You can find him on LinkedIn. I think he puts his best stuff there. And here's what I've learned. When you do cold exposure just before bed, it's going to be hard to get to sleep. You have a lot of energy. Your girlfriend doesn't want to cuddle with you in the same way. But when you do it, a couple or 3 hours before bed, you're preparing your body for sleep by reducing your temperature and sleep quality. I mean, there's a natural depression of your homeostatic temperature during sleep, and sleep quality improves when you prepare yourself in that way. So more of our customers have the Whoop strap or the Aura ring, and they're beginning to do their own biohacking experiments with this. There are other products that are meant to keep your bed a little colder or suggest turning down the temperature in your bedroom. And it seems to fit with the experience that Ben Greenfield and some other people have had. However, my experience is 9 o'clock is too late. I'll be up for another hour and a half if I do it that
time. Gotcha. Yeah, that's good information. And so, as we wrap up, how would one follow up and check out the Forge? Where did they go to follow up with you?
Morozkoforge.com, MOROZKOFORGE.com. Everybody has a blog, but I'm a scientist and I can't bring myself to write a blog post. So click on the link that says journal. No, that's the way science moves forward. And in there, there's a bunch of good articles. Our best articles have a story, kind of a central character who's experienced something. and the science that helps explain the story. So you can join our mailing list. We never spam. We don't know how to do all that internet sales funnel checklist thing that, everybody makes you a millionaire overnight. And sometimes I wish we did. But the fact is, you'll get a notice when we write a new article or I come across something in the library and I want to share it with the community. That's one way. You can also go, if your interests are a bit broader, to seagertp.substack.com. So seagertp.substack.com. And I publish articles. Sometimes they're about business, but I've been doing a lot about relationships, about trauma and psychology, as it's more about my personal journey the last 5 or 6 years. And so if your interests are broader than ice baths and cold exposure, it might be worth popping in there and seeing what's going on with me and whether any of that relates to you.
Sounds very, very good. I just want to encourage everybody as we close up here to take advantage of this information. I'm so thankful that you're sharing it with us today. I'm trying to think of some way to say it, but really, I guess I'm feeling, hey, people need to embrace the cold. Try to work, even if it's baby steps. I'm all into the tortoise mentality, and this is one of those things that I'm gonna put it out there. I'm gonna try to do a little bit of that. I know living on the Hood Canal last year, we jumped in December, and I thought for sure it was at least 35. It was 44 degrees,
Yep.
But that was cold. But yeah, to know that there's a good health benefit there encourages me to do more of it. And I hope other people see that benefit. There's good things out there. And in this culture of fear that we have, if we take a little bit of our own health advocacy, do some of these good things and have the mindset that the body's pretty amazing, and let's treat it a little bit better and help it be able to be stronger. So thank you so much for being with us today, Tom. I really appreciate it. All right. See you, everybody.